Great. We can all use that song.
Yeah. It's helped me out more than a few times. Yeah. It's so funny how something like that will jump into your head, like, oh my God. And all of a sudden in my mind, I'm going, helps you chill out. And just for that particular song, there's another verse in there that we didn't do when we did children's liturgy, but it was for a boy in the group who, like a lot of people that I've met, including my son with high-functioning autism, when he would get angry, he would direct it toward his mom and get aggressive with her. And as a matter of fact, and it was so interesting, I talked to this family this week, and I told them I was giving this talk, and I said, could I have your permission to tell your son's story of what happened in church one day? And she said, absolutely. I said, I won't tell your names, but I think it's something that everyone needs to hear. Yeah. I came in to work, I work at St. Peter Chanel, and I'm the Special Needs Religious Education Coordinator. And my name's Jean Lyons. And I came into work on Monday morning, and the coordinator for the teens came running up to me. She goes, here is a phone number. You need to call it. She said, this family needs some help. And I'm looking at it, and I saw the name, and I didn't know it. And here it was a family that had been coming to our parish, but they hadn't registered yet. And apparently, at the teen mass, which was one of the masses I didn't make it to that weekend, just the evening before, something happened during church where this mom and her, let's see, 18-year-old son were in their pew, and just as she was getting ready to step out for communion, something had happened that he had gotten upset about, and he shoved her. And he shoved her so hard that she flew across the aisle and smashed her head on the end of the next set of pews across the aisle. And I think she actually passed out. And the amazing thing was, well, a couple amazing things. So there she is on the floor, and her son continues up to communion and receives communion and goes back around and sits down and kneels and says his prayers. And meanwhile, a bunch of parishioners came forward, got a hold of her and helped her to the back of the church and called 911 for her. Meanwhile, part of that group were talking and saying, you know, I'm just wondering about autism, because they noticed some movements that they recognized, and just the way this young man carried himself, and which is like, it's like a dream come true for me, like for my son, if someone were to see him and the way that he walks differently, you know, that they wouldn't look and go, oh gosh, what a weirdo, but that they'd look and go, I wonder if he has autism. Wow, I bet he's really interesting. Well, anyway, some parishioners came and decided to sit right behind the young man so that at the end of Mass, which was almost over, they could take him back and get him back with his mom. And how cool is that? I mean, I've heard of churches where someone with autism is kicked out because they're making too much noise, or because people are afraid of aggression, you know, just not knowing. And here we had an episode of aggression in church, and parishioners thought to come and help. And the mom was fine, but because of this, I was able to contact this family, and now their son is one of the ones that comes and does the Bible studies with me and helps to lead the Children's Liturgy of the Word with a group of kids that I work with, several of whom have disabilities, and they're leaders for Children's Liturgy of the Word. And he also has joined the Teen Fellowship group. And the aggression toward his mom has, I mean, from last time I talked to her, it hasn't happened again. because he has a social outlet. And sometimes you need lots of other things to work on that, but for him, that made a huge difference. So a little story of welcoming. Even when a lot of people might be intimidated, that if you do a lot of education within your parish, you're more likely to get that positive response. And when it happens, it's just wonderful. And when I talked to his mom this past week, she goes, as horrible as that day was, she said, it's amazing, what God brought out of it. She says, and now we're a part of this parish, and my son is doing so much better. And it all started with that horrible day. Okay, could I ask someone to be in charge of hitting the button for advancing the slideshow?
Yeah.
Would you do that?
I'll try,
Carol?
yes.
Thank you.
Button. You have to tell me where the button is. I'm new at
You
this.
can just sit on next to that, and you just want to hit this little down button.
Oh, the down button, all right.
Yeah, and if you need to back up, you can hit the up button.
All right.
Okay. Now, you have a lot in your handouts that I'm not going to be able to cover, so we're just going to kind of fly through here, and I'll try to touch on the things that I think are the most important to get, face to face, and other stuff you can, read at home. And my email and my phone number's on there, so if you have any questions or you want to contact me, that'd be great. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Alrighty, this first slide in your handouts, you can just follow along, just gives you a little bit of my background. I'm not a special ed person. I thought about going into special ed, but I grew up in Catholic schools and I never got to see it in action. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but when it came time, and I remember thinking this through, maybe that sounds like a really good thing to do, to go into special ed. But I had never seen it, and it just seemed so scary to me, And that whole way that God has of tapping you on the shoulder and getting your attention. I went to regular education, and my first year of teaching, I was given some kids who were mainstreamed and had always been in a self-contained special ed classroom. And those kids taught me so much, and they were actually part of God's plan for getting me ready for my son, Sean, who has Asperger's syndrome. Let's go to the next one. And this is kind of my disclaimer, I'm not any of these things, and yet I have this job at my parish. And it just goes to show you do not have to be a professional to do this. Please do it at home. Okay. And again, it was just such a sad thing that the Catholic schools shielded me, from disabilities. And sometimes I worry, my son has taught me so much about some of these things that were misconceptions that I had had. Being prayerful doesn't always mean being totally quiet and still in your body. Some people need to move in order to pray, in order to focus, in order to connect with God. And it was so funny, when I first got my job, there were people that I would meet who found out that I had this new position at the church, and there were even some that said, I didn't know we had any special needs people in our parish. It's like, hello, Catholic Church! We're out here! And I think that when kids have an opportunity to learn and play side by side with classmates with special needs, it's the state-of-the-art way of teaching Christianity, compassion, love, being able to see Jesus in everyone. That's the state-of-the-art way to teach it. And sometimes I wonder, in our Catholic schools, and both of my boys went to Catholic school. My son Sean was accepted at Queen of Angels, by their founding principal. She was a religious sister, and she wanted lots of diversity, and she welcomed my son, diagnosis and all, and we sat down with her and spelled out exactly what it would be like. And we also, what we offered to do, we said, we know you don't have the expertise for this in your school, but if we fund a position for an aide who can work with any kid, but will, you know, pay specific attention to ours when he needs it, but when he doesn't need her, she can help all over the school. And this principal said yes, and it was just amazing. But, okay, what was, oh, when I look at the Catholic schools, and a lot of times I'll see a drive to have state-of-the-art technology and materials and media center and, you know, beautiful decor and state-of-the-art materials. But wouldn't it be cool if we could invest and find it very important to invest in state-of-the-art religious education that really is the best way to teach our kids how to be compassionate and how to do what Jesus would do? That's where we should be pushing to go state-of-the-art. And it's something, though, that we can do very well in our parishes. A lot of times people don't think of it, don't think of doing it, but I can tell you, I think it has made a huge difference in our parish, not just for people with special needs, but for everyone. When I think of the people who stepped forward when that young man was in crisis during Mass, they were there to help him. They were not, you know, I'm sure on some level they were fearful of what he might do, but they did what Jesus would do. You know, how awesome is that? State of the art. Okay. This is something, you can read it when you get a chance. This is on the inside of our First Communion program, because it's just been so neat over the years, the number of kids who are receiving the sacraments in our parish who have significant disabilities that affect their behavior. And so this is there to help everyone to realize that someone who they think is misbehaving, you know, might just, you know, have things that they're working on and struggling with that might not be all that difficult for other kids. And you just have to look at it through different eyes. Okay, and I've already kind of talked about this. Oh, and just to tell you, you know, when I was making my decision, do I go into special ed or regular education? And I went regular education. When my son Sean was at Queen of Angels Elementary School, one of my best days of his experiences there, which were wonderful, was when his aide called me up after school, and we were always on the phone with each other after school and collaborating on what would be the next step for him in his inclusion program. But she said that one of the kids in his class came up to her and said, "Mrs. Hart, when I grow up, I want to do what you do." And it's like, if only I'd had a Mrs. Hart, you know, she would have shown me. So let's go to the next one. Some things that I learned from Sean. A big part, I think, of welcoming families who have family members with disabilities is to help them with sensory differences, which seem to be a part of so many disabilities out there. And also there are kids who who never really get a diagnosis, but who also benefit greatly by having a PSR teacher and people around them in Mass who are starting to learn about sensory differences. Because that's one of those things that can make other people think that there's misbehavior going on when it's someone who's dealing with someone who's dealing with a nervous system that works very differently. So let's see, if you're helping with sensory things, it can help a lot in your PSR classroom. And a big part of it is just that for a lot of kids, not just ones with disabilities, it helps them moving helps them to learn, giving them opportunities to move. And sometimes there's a kid with a disability that makes a teacher very aware of that. And she'll find that by making accommodations and incorporating movement for this one particular kid, that all of a sudden her PSR class is going better than it had any other year before. And it's like, why is that? Well, all the kids benefit from sensory awareness. And then there are other things like having a mindset of catching kids being good. That helps all kids, rather than being there to be the enforcer and pounce on you and criticize you when you're misbehaving. Using visuals helps a lot with kids with all kinds of disabilities, and it helps everyone in the class. Making things personalized, making use of the kids' special interests and talents helps a lot. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Let's see. A big part of this is that a teacher needs to be willing to be a good behavior detective, willing to try different things for allowing more movement and allowing some sensory in the classroom. And as a detective, you try something. You're also a scientist. You try something, you see if it helps, you watch the kids' behavior to see if you need to tweak it and try something a little bit differently. And it's this whole thing about how you don't have to be an expert coming in, you just have to be willing to try new things, willing to experiment, and see what you can do to make a difference. Alrighty, so what is this sensory stuff? You know, everyone's nervous system is slightly different. No one has a perfect nervous system. And if your nervous system works differently, then your senses work differently. They can work a little differently, a whole lot differently. Maybe one sense aggravates things for you, like for some people, the background noise that projector is making right now, that our nervous systems let us all filter it out, and you haven't even, most people have not even thought about it. But for someone whose hearing is very sensitive to the particular frequencies in that sound, that can be the thing that hits them when they come into the room, you know? And so the detective part is trying to figure out what it is. And sometimes the kids will just tell you, you know, what is that horrible noise? And you're going, and then you have to get really still and ask them lots of questions and try to figure it out. Okay, and there are different things when you have sensory differences that cause difficulties for you. It can be that you're having sensory overload and you have kind of a make it stop kind of reaction, like being bothered by the sound of a projector. Or you could have sensory craving, where you need extra stimulation in one or some of your senses, and you're behaving in a way that helps you to get that extra stimulation. And the other thing that's tricky is that there are more than 5 senses. Your kindergarten teacher did not tell you the truth. And big ones that people don't know about are the vestibular sense and the proprioceptive sense. When you know about them, it makes it so much easier to do your detective work as a PSR teacher. The vestibular sense, you know how when you're little you learn that our eyes help us see and our ears are in charge of hearing. Well, your vestibular sense comes from your semicircular canals deep inside your inner ear, and there's this gelatinous stuff that sloshes back and forth. And to me, I think of it almost as working like a carpenter's level that you put up to be able to hang that picture straight, and the way that little bubble moves. Well, when that gelatinous stuff sloshes back and forth, it sends information through your nervous system that allows you to keep on balance without a lot of effort. It's something that happens usually without your thinking about it, if that part of your nervous system is pretty typical. Okay, it allows you, like if I bend over to pick up a pencil, you know, the fluid sloshes into one of those canals, and that helps my body to be able to do that without falling over. But we've all met kids that fall out of their chairs on a regular basis, you know, that would fall when they go to bend over to pick up something. And so that means something's going on with their vestibular sense. Let me just back up just a little bit. So for a person whose vestibular system bombards them, that's going to be someone who walks and moves very carefully. And you might have seen some students like that. And you wonder what's going on. The first time I watched the movie Rain Man, rent it if you haven't seen it. But the first time I watched it, something about that vestibular thing, I didn't know enough about it, but it really ticked me off because that's how the character that Dustin Hoffman played, that's how he moved. There's a scene where he's learning how to dance in an elevator, and he's dancing and he has his head tipped and he's just going like this. And that bothered me a lot because my son on the autism spectrum, you know, he's always moving like this, and he did a lot of rocking, and when you think about it, all he's doing is getting a good slosh in his semicircular canals, because that's what he needs to feel kind of normal. That feels better to him. He feels more organized and able to focus. And so you've got someone who's craving that movement, and that can drive a teacher nuts if she doesn't know what the kid is, why the kid is doing that. And you've got someone else who is avoiding any kind of sloshing, and they're moving carefully, and they might not want to do the 10 Commandment relay race that you have set up for for your lesson that day. Okay, so let's go to the proprioceptive sense, and that you get information in your nervous system for proprioception in your joints and tendons and muscles, and it's in charge of a few different things. For someone who's craving more input, they're going to be doing a lot of bashing and crashing. When they go to sit in their chair, they're going to crash into their chair. And you think, oh, you know, how rude. And it's like, no, that just feels really good. And it's nice to be able to talk about these kind of things with your students, too, about how we all need to move in different ways. And that what helps one person might be a problem for another person. And we have to learn ways to accommodate each other, okay? And so if someone is overwhelmed by proprioceptive input, that might be one of those kids that when you sit on the floor for an activity in the circle, they just kind of seem to melt into the floor. You've seen that before, melting children. Sit up, you know. Okay, another issue with it is not being able to tell how much space you take up. And so my son, as a young child, would look at you in the chair next to you, and he would think, yeah, I can fit between there, and I can run, and easily fit between here. And of course, I mean, the messages that people get about where their body is in space, he doesn't get those. So of course he would knock you over, he would knock over this chair, there would be a really big problem. Plus, he'd also probably try to fit there with his arms out like this. I mean, it's not knowing, in the hall at school, I had to teach his schoolmates that if his arms were floating when he was walking through the hallways, you have to try to think of a positive to tell them what you'd like them to do rather than being that enforcer. Quit bumping into people. Stop that. Just stop that. He's like, stop what? I don't know what you're talking about. But I had to teach his classmates that when they saw that happening to say, hey, Sean, put your hands on your legs. So they would tell him what they'd like him to do in a positive way, instead of stop bumping into people, because he really didn't know how to do that. So a lot of it is in how you address the situation. Okay, let's go to the next one. A sense of touch can work differently. Some kids need deep pressure on their skin. And so that might be a kid who tries to crawl under the desk. You know, what they're trying to do is get deep pressure. Or there might even be a kid who's hugging everybody all the time, and it's driving you nuts. So another thing you might see is for a kid that, you know, when you go up to them and you go, hi, how are you? That real light, gentle touch, you could actually see a flinch from that. And when you see that, it doesn't mean that you've hurt them, but that their sensory system is aroused by that light, tickly touch. So for a kid like that, and you're trying to get their attention, you might go over and put your hand on their shoulder and actually press, which seems very strange to do. How does it feel?
I don't know.
A lot of times it's surprisingly kind of, you know, like if you, it makes me think of when you, something that a lot of us experience when you go to the dentist and you're feeling a little anxious, you know, about how much scraping they're gonna have to do or whatever. And you're there in the chair and you're just feeling just a little anxious, but you're telling yourself, I can handle this, I can handle this. And then what do you call them?
Hygienist.
The hygienist, thank you, comes in and puts that lead apron over you to do the x-rays. And just picture in your mind, she puts that on you. Can you, I mean, for me, it's very clear. I automatically, my whole body feels, you know, and there's something about that. Do you have a, like, does that does that ring a bell for you? That whole deep pressure thing. Oh, this is a big one, the mouth and taste sensitivities with receiving the Eucharist. For some kids, the sensory issues with their mouth is a really big deal. One boy with autism that I worked with to receive his first communion, we practiced for about 5 months. He really wanted it. I mean, he would go up to communion with his parents and he'd try really hard to grab the hosts, you know. And you could look at that as, oh, what a rude child. Or you could look at that as, wow, he really wants to receive Jesus in the Eucharist. Wow. And so you could tell he was so excited when we first started practicing. And it's very important to practice. So for months before he was to make his first communion, I got a bunch of unconsecrated hosts. And we talked a lot about that this is church bread. Because you call it bread, and the kid's going, I've never made a sandwich out of something that looked like that. You know, even if he did not have much in the way of conversational language, but it's just very confusing just to call it bread. So I call it church bread. It's a special kind of bread. And we talked over and over about how when the priest holds it up and you hear the bells ring 3 times, and see if you can borrow the bells once in a while for a lesson. That's when, and so they don't do that anymore in every parish, but in ours they do. So we use those sensory, the visual, and what they hear with the bells ringing, that the church bread becomes Jesus bread. And I use the word Jesus bread, and then I always say after that, it's Jesus. But I also use that Jesus bread combination because I tell them it still looks like bread, it still tastes like it still looks like church bread, it still tastes like church bread, but when the priest has held it up and those bells ring, it has become Jesus bread, so Jesus can be in us. And so that helps a lot. And because people think, oh, well, you shouldn't use those unconsecrated hosts for practice. It will confuse them. It will confuse them terribly. But, you know, you have to explain. And it's so much better than for them to have never felt that texture that's unlike any other food that you eat. I mean, maybe a little bit of similarity to rice cakes, but those are real big and thick and crunchy. I mean, there's nothing that really tastes and melts in your mouth and has that texture that the host does. And so the first time that I tried it with this boy, he was so excited. He puts it in his mouth and he goes, And like, you know, we're all, oh my goodness. And it really, he had a very sensitive gag reflex. And he never ended up throwing up, but I felt so badly because he sure felt like it. And yet, you could tell he wanted to receive Jesus so badly because he kept on practicing. And yes.
Imagine if you hadn't practiced like his first communion, he would have been like,
totally. I mean, people would have freaked out, you know, and for him, I mean, how scary would that have been, you know? And so we ended up going to the tiniest sliver, starting off with the teeny tiniest sliver. And I actually I took a name badge like this after he had made his first communion, which he did successfully, by the way, with a sliver. And he did this, because for him, sticking it in his mouth, although this was actually very hard to learn. This movement can be very difficult to learn for some kids. But we got that. As a matter of fact, as he learned, this is what he preferred to do. He would walk up and he'd go, which I just loved. And once he had done that, then he could go like this. And let's see, what was and just being able to have the tiniest piece. And what I did, because I was worried that some of our extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion there might be some who might not believe that this kid could receive communion. So I took his first communion certificate and I shrunk it down, almost like a first communion license. And I put it in the pouch, and then I had a little note on here that said, I have autism, please be patient. His family was fine with that. And it said, I do my best when I receive a piece of the host like this. And I had a, life-size drawing of exactly the size piece that he did his best with. And so he could wear that. I gave his family several of them, because when you have a kid with special needs, it's very hard to stay organized and keep track of things. And I hung some extra ones in the vesting sacristy for the altar servers, so they would always be there if they needed them. As it turned out, he decided his second time of receiving communion, second or third time, after he had his first communion, that he wanted the whole host, and he did it. And from then on, so something clicked for him that I can do this. And so just on his own, and we didn't really need those fancy licenses for communion, but that's very important. And you might even want to go without the wine because the taste is going to be very inconsistent for a kid who has really intense sensory difficulties with their mouth. So let's go to the next one. And what time do we finish up?
11:15.
11:15, okay.
You can do it.
Okay, yeah. Another thing that can be really helpful are fidgets. And when kids are fidgeting, which my son, he needed to fidget to pay attention. Now a lot of people would look at him and think, quit playing with that toy, put that down and pay attention. But for him, it was, I need to have something to fidget with so I can pay attention. And so I have a bunch of fidgets. And we can just pass these around. And again, you have to teach the kids what they're for and how you're going to use them. You might only want to try for a few minutes at a time at first, and explain to them that we're going to do something that might help some of us, might help our nervous systems to learn better and do an even better job in our religion classes. And that for some people, it's helpful to have something in their hands that they can twiddle with. And you need to say, it looks like a toy, doesn't it? It looks like a toy. But we're only going to use them in here, people who can use it more like a tool, something that can help you to get something done, like a hammer helps you to do some carpentry work. And so you have to use it in a way, when I give kids fidgets, we'll often have a rule that it has to be in one hand or both hands, Or if you're sitting at desks, you know, flat on the desk. If you're sitting on the floor, in your lap. Okay? And so if it has to be in one hand or both hands or in your lap or on the desk, is this ever okay? No, even though it's fun to do, that's something that will make it hard for anybody to pay attention. And even if you're a person that you can do this and still pay attention, the people next to you, there's a very good chance that it would make it hard for them to pay attention. So we can experiment and try these out, and you can see, you have to be a detective too, you can tell the kids, to notice, does having this and fiddling with it make it easier for me to pay attention or more difficult? And there's no right or wrong. If it makes it more difficult for you, makes your life a little easier, you don't have to bring things with you, you know. If you're the type of person that it does help you to have something interesting in your hands to feel, then that's something important that you can learn about yourself, and you can bring things along to help you to learn. But you have to follow those rules, and you have to tell them that as the teacher, you're the one that decides, is this helping you or hurting you? They need to help think about it, but if you see someone doing this, even if that kid thinks, oh, this is helping me, you know, it's not working for our class, so I need to take it away. Another thing you can say is that if you're using a fidget, and this is one of those grip things, and this is heavy, all of these are giving you proprioceptive input in your hands. And for some kids, that's very helpful. If you're using it, and you know, I'll call on you. And if you're using it and you can answer, or you can ask a question that shows me that you are paying attention with us, that's one way that I'll know that this helps you. Now, it must need some oil on it. I would not use this in this state. Yeah, that would not be good. WD-40, okay. But we can pass this around. Oh, and one of my inventions is in here.
Oh,
A sensory.
Wow.
Do you like that? Would you like to hold it? And I've had kids from toddlers to teenagers hold this at Mass. It's carefully designed so it's not going to make as much noise as a wooden or a bead rosary would make if it hits against the pews.
So you made them by yourself?
Yeah, and they're actually fun to make. And another one of my kids loves doing this. And it's a good teaching aid for how you say the rosary, because you can do this to show the kids that one prayer goes with each bead. Would you like to see what you think of that? See how it feels. Yeah. Now, if it's going like this around your head, that shows that's making it harder for other people to pay attention. I've got to tell a story about a priest who came to visit in my son's 4th grade class at Queen of Angels. And my son was using a fidget. And the priest came in to talk to the children about the priesthood. And you know, he must have, our priests are so busy. And he must have been a little preoccupied because my son's aide said that he just wasn't as smooth as he usually is when he's talking, and he's very good with children. And she just thought, you know, something's going on, he's a little preoccupied. But there's my son Sean sitting there in the 4th grade class with something like this, a stress ball type of thing. And he's going like this, and he's listening to the priest. And the priest had been to this class several times and had really neat. He asked questions about why my son had a rocking chair in the room that he used most of the time. Other kids could use it too, but he just noticed my son was using it a little more. Why there was a beanbag chair that would kind of hug and squish you. Why there was a ball. Let's see. If you could get the ball for us, we'll pass that around. My son would sit on a ball sometimes. and you should give this a try. The whole idea that sitting on a ball instead of your chair, and it's an exercise ball. And as a teacher, you would want one that, for the typical height of kids in your room, lets them sit at their desk and be at the right height. You don't want them like this. They're not going to be able to do their work. You don't want them like this. So the priest knew about all these things, which was so cool, but it just happened that he hadn't experienced Sean needing to fidget with something. And so he wasn't sure what was going on, and he did probably what the nuns had done when he was a boy. He walked up to my son and he goes, "I'll take that." Uh-oh. Confiscated. That's what they used to call it when I was a kid. and so then the priest took the fidget, and then while he was talking, the aide noticed he's going like this, talking to the kids. And she noticed that all of a sudden his speech was completely smooth. He seemed very, very relaxed and focused. And all of a sudden his speaking ability was cranked up several notches. And she had to call me right after school to tell me that one. I thought it was awesome.
Did he realize it?
And I cannot remember if she had a chance to pull him aside, after class and explain that he just did a beautiful demonstration. But there was one problem. By the end of the talk, he was throwing it back. Oh. So, we would have had to take it away from him at that point. In your handouts, there are all kinds of suggestions for these sensory things. Yeah, so let's go ahead. I'll let you read through. Oh, let's do the sensory song. You guys can do this with me. It's a melody that most of you will recognize. And what I'm actually going to do is be kind of like a Weird Al Yankovic. This is a song parody where I've substituted other words for a popular song. Okay. So once you catch on, you just join in with me. And this is also to help you experience that when you sing something, it makes it easier to learn about it. For a lot of our kids, words set to music are easier to absorb than just spoken words. So see what you think. And as you start to catch on, just sing along with me. all of you all a flyer about the Jubilee music class that we had at St. Peter Chanel. And this has been just huge for our parish in having awareness of all the people with special needs. And I do this music class, it's free. It's 3 times a week. Once at Queen of Angels after school each week, and then 2 times up in our choir room at St. Peter Chanel. And the sensory song made me think so much about it because we start off with this big circle when we're in the choir room. And in our choir room, we actually have 2 swings that we pull up to the circle. And it's a circle of what I call alternative seating. And there are all kinds of things like the therapy exercise ball. Some kids like to sit on one of those. And again, we have to teach them, you know, appropriate ways to sit on it. There are beanbag chairs, there are rocking chairs. There are these things that are like a therapy ball that are called gym donuts. And the kids sit on those, and you can stay in one place, but you can rock or bounce or sway, especially for all the kids when they're coming to me after a school day. You can just see how much they need the alternative seating.
Yeah, it's not just for kids with disabilities. Like we have one at home, and my siblings love it.
Yes.
It'll channel their energy in a different way rather than breaking stuff.
Yeah, all of these things, you'll find that as you start to make adaptations, and I would even try, even if I had a class where, no, I didn't even suspect anyone had a disability. You can try things like this and just see. Because I know with my son, every year in his classes, there would always be someone who found out because of my son, and the kids who need it tend to be drawn to it. So there would be, you know, certain kids that, could I sit on that ball once in a while? And there were a few of them that found, wow, I do so much better when I'm sitting on this ball. You know, not all the time. For my son, we had to teach him that when he started to get slumpy, for him, that was a time when he needed to get the ball out and sit on it. And at first, he wouldn't notice, and his aide in the class or the teacher learned to say, you know, I noticed that you're slumping over. What do you think would help? I think the ball would help. Let's try it, and then we'll check in 5 minutes and see, is it helping? And you know, there were always other kids. Now this next set of slides, go ahead to the next one. It gives you some really clear instructions on how to introduce sensory items into your class. And I'll let you read that on your own. Let's go to the next one, and then the next one. And this is a flow chart for when you're using it. You know, some people make the mistake that, you know, this lady said I'm supposed to use this stuff in my room, but when I give it to the kids, you know, pandemonium breaks out, you know, but this lady says I'm supposed to. He's like, no. You follow this flow chart. So if you're trying the ball or trying a fidget, when you use the fidget, if I see, as the teacher, if I see that you are following directions, participating, giving thoughtful answers, allowing other people to do those things, I know that item is helping you and you may continue to use it. But if I see that when you're using that fidget, you're not following directions, you're not able to participate, all of these things, I can tell that that item is causing problems for you. It's not helping. So does it make sense to use it in our class? And it's not that you're a bad kid or you're, you know, being bad. It's that that doesn't happen to help with your particular nervous system. Okay, and let me just back up here with Jubilee Music. This is specifically for kids with and without disabilities. I love that a lot of the Queen of Angels kids come over and participate in this after school, because for a lot of them, it's their only chance to be with the kids with disabilities who come to the class. And so I feel like, yay, I'm able to squeeze in some of that state-of-the-art, you know, learning to do what Jesus would do. Okay, let's see. We have, oh, she's left down, okay. Let's see what other things would be really, so we're not going to be able to do everything. Okay, let's look at instructional, I think it's a couple more slides. There, instructional options. These are some of the things that we have at St. Peter Chanel. We'll have full inclusion. Most of our kids have this, where they might have a disability, but they are in a regular religious ed classroom, typical number of students, or it might be that that kid just can do well in a religious ed classroom that's taught in the typical way, but they would do better with a smaller number of students with them. It's less stimulating. And so, we can try to do that for them. Some of them might do best with one-on-one, but whenever that is the case, I always try to find a typically developing peer buddy that's very carefully chosen to come in and join us. So we're doing what some people call reverse inclusion, having kids that don't have a diagnosis come in, because I want that learning to happen. And I've just seen so often when a kid who has some special needs, sometimes they don't get the opportunity to be with other kids who are expert talkers and expert players and expert socializers, and those are important things for them to be able to experience. And once in a while, you'll just get to see them take off just by having that experience. It's just amazing. And let's see, sometimes kids will need a combination of group and one-on-one instruction. Some of our kids, as a matter of fact, several of them do very well in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which we have traditional classrooms for PSR. Catechesis of the Good Shepherd are Montessori-style classrooms. And the great thing about that, and if you work with any kids with disabilities, and even if you don't, if you have a Catechesis of the Good Shepherd room, strike up a conversation with those teachers, get to know them. And if you're teaching something like, we're learning about the Annunciation this week. Does Catechesis of the Good Shepherd have something that is good at teaching that? And she might say to you, well, here, you could borrow this for your lesson. And if that happened, what she would give you, in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, they have a little house that you sit on the table. It has a miniature Mary figurine. It has an angel figurine, and you can read the scripture and have the kids act out what happened. It has either a dove or a flame, a wooden shape of a flame or a wooden shape of a dove on a popsicle stick. And you would have it come flying down, and you could actually, when the Holy Spirit overshadows Mary, you can actually make, if you put the little house in the right light, you can actually have it make a shadow over her when it overshadows. I mean, it's so concrete that it's a beautiful way to teach all kids. And so if you can borrow some of those materials, if you have that option at your parish, one really neat thing about it is that the kids, it allows for a little more movement. The kids are constantly getting up and getting the next activity, the next work to sit down and work with. They might sit on the floor to do it, they might sit on a table, they have a little more choice, they might need to be helped to deal with making choices. You might need to narrow choices down for them, but that can be very helpful. And this group of guys that I work with, that their continuing religious education is that we meet twice a month to study the scripture for the third Sunday after that. And we study that scripture, and then when that Sunday rolls around, well, during our scripture study, we talk about how we would teach this to little children in children's liturgy of the word, where the little kids come. In our church, they come to our chapel. They have the opportunity to do that during some of the masses. And readings are read to them in child-friendly language. And the little gospel reflection, the reflection on the readings is geared right to them. It's not, going over their heads. It's not difficult to understand. And so for one of our children's liturgy presentation groups, it's a group of my older teens who, many of them have disabilities, but we've had other kids come and ask to join us who don't have disabilities. It's very, very cool. We have one young man who has this beautiful foreign accent. And he loves to do the first reading. That's what he loves to do. And he also is such a good reader, which surprises a lot of people because he's in special education at his school. But the issue is that he reads so quickly. He reads more quickly than I could, and with this accent. So I remember the first day he did it in our children's liturgy group, and he went up to the ambo, which he really loved doing, and he started to read as beautifully as he did. The kids are all out there in the congregation going. So we use a screen in PowerPoint. So I learned from then on that when he's doing a reading, I put that whole reading up there. And I also do a very quick summary of it right after he's done. And, you know, that's the accommodation. But
this concludes session 2. Please make your way up the stairs to the side entrance door near Bishop Hall. Your lunch ticket is the green ticket provided in your name pouch. If you did not receive a lunch ticket, go to the other parent table in Bishop Hall.
I can just tell you one quick story before you go about the beauty of doing this in your parish. After this one young man did his reading in our children's liturgy group for the first time, a boy, middle school boy, who it's kind of unusual that he would come to children's liturgy, but he probably needed a movement break. He needed to walk. And he was there in children's liturgy. He was not being disruptive. He was doing a great job. And I think it was on a God impulse that he was there. Because as the children were filing out, he came forward to me and he said, you know, the new kid you have. And he was, you know, being very quiet and discreet about it. He goes, I noticed something. Oh, really? You did? He said, yes. He said, I'm not sure if he's really good with language. I think he has some trouble. And I think he has a little hard time bonding with other people. And in my mind, I'm going, well, you've just described autism beautifully. And so I'm listening, and he says, I would really like to go over and tell him what a great job he did. And I said, well, great. I said, do you feel like you need a little help doing that? And he said, yeah, I do. So, well, come on over. And I took him over and I introduced him to the guy. And the guy just bent right down and gave him a great big hug. And you know what I did? When, as soon as I got home, I found out the name of the little boy who did that. I got on the phone and called his mother. And I told her exactly what he had done and how beautiful it was. And it was just one of those, I got to see Jesus in action. And it was all because of this kid with autism and what his presence brought to that room and how God used his gifts and how through him brought out the gifts in another child. And that child started coming to Jubilee Music. You know, I told him, I said, I think you may have discovered a gift that you didn't know that you had. And that's another thing in Jubilee Music, the teens that come. I love it when the Catholic high school students come who have never had an opportunity, unless they have a family member or a close neighbor, and they come and help out at Jubilee Music. And I've seen some of them discover that they had a gift. And when I see it, I point it out to them. Did you notice how awesome you are at working with this child or with that child? And I've had some of them decide to become speech therapists, decide to become a pediatric neurologist, to be a special ed teacher. And they wouldn't have thought of that if it hadn't been for having that experience of welcoming all God's children. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.